and welcome to The Hard Sell, a programme where the stick in the swill-bucket rattles back. It's Halloween again somehow, and over the 87 decades I've been making this programme we've seen spooky pasta, vampire crisps, and whatever this was.
If you don't like it, fuck off.
In most cases, apart from that last one, adverts use horror as an implied attribute. Just an exercise in semiotics. Vampires are a rich in such vein, no pun intended, with their lore, or indeed multiple laws, involving everything from sunlight to religious iconography to herbs and spices. Which means they come in handy as ready-made icons that can fit all sorts of products, as we've seen. Sunglasses, pizza, breakfast foods. And that's just the ones that make some kind of intuitive sense. The versatility of the vampire, of course, is down to its being such a basic, widespread, and old concept. Every culture has a version of the vampire with a unique quirk of their own, which has bled through to the shared consciousness as part of the full archetype over the course of centuries. The idea of the predator is as old as life itself, after all, and the vampire is just an adaptation of that. Most other horror icons are much, much younger, like the one I'm very roughly dressed as today, Frankensteins the Monsterman. He comes from a single novel from a single person's imagination, filtered through various interpretations for stage and screen over the course of a couple of 100 years. Nowhere near as much variety for old Frank as for vampires. Instead of millennia of lore stretching back about as far as the human race has been conscious, Frankenstein's archetype mostly comes from a little over a century of motion pictures, from Thomas Edison to Max Landis, and plenty of people in between who weren't bastards. Most notably, of course, James Whale. No, I said not a bastard.
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
The classic 1931 Universal Studios Frankenstein's Monster is very much the default version of the Big Lummox to this day. He's green, he's flat-headed, he's got bolts coming out of his neck, he's played by Boris Karloff, and he'll advertise anything, even ballpoint pens.
Dear Dick, you're probably not going to believe this, but...
There's great attention to detail in this one. Not only is the premise consistent with the ending of the novel, sort of, the monster's internal dialogue is even presented as a Boris Karloff impression. Having said that, he doesn't quite look right, having a bulbous chin and no neck bolts or forehead scar, but that'll be a copyright thing. Now, you might be thinking at this point that Mary Shelley's Frankenstein is well in the public domain, having been written just over 200 years ago. And it is. The text of the book, its plot and characters, and even the basic concept of Frankenstein's Monster are all long out of copyright. But the Universal film isn't. And nor is the monster design used therein, which Universal have jealously guarded ever since. This is why, when Hammer made their own Frankenstein series, Christopher Lee had to be made up to look nothing whatsoever like the Karloff model, and why Peter Boyle had his usual round head in Young Frankenstein. Hammer were allowed to use a variation on the flat-top design for the third in their series, The Evil of Frankenstein, but only because Universal were its US distributors. Universal aren't completely parochial. They will let people use their classic monster in advertising, if they can pay. which only the very biggest companies usually can. Mars Incorporated, for example.
Flowers, flowers, dear little flowers. Hello, would you like a flower? Can I have one? If you have two of something, you should share one. You have two, share one, share one, share one.
Two for me. None for you.
This is about as close and respectful to the original movie, if not the book, as it gets in this bloody industry. And the monster design is more or less classic Universal. But if you spotted the admittedly almost unreadable small print at the start there, it's not surprising. Licensed from Universal Studios, probably at considerable cost. So, generally speaking, unless you're prepared to pay millions for the privilege, the classic Karloff Frankenstein is a no-go. Unless, of course, you cheat. Legally speaking, Universal's own guidelines for whether or not to sue someone come down to 5 elements. The flat head, the big old forehead, a scar somewhere on said forehead, neck bolts, and green skin. Use all 5 of those, and Universal will beat you to death with hammers. Leave out the scar, for example, or put the bolts on the side of the head, and you're golden. Theoretically. So you could make an advert like this one, for example, which doesn't even pretend not to be indebted to Universal's Frankenstein.
Money's mushrooms make me
Marvelous.
Mushrooms. Why not? Of course, a Canadian mushroom growing company based in British Columbia, which is what they are, is unlikely to have such deep pockets as Mars Incorporated, owner of several dozen beloved brands of confectionery, not to mention Pedigree Chum and Whiskers. And yet the Frankensteins Monster here is blatantly based on the one from the Universal films. It even has his secondary characteristics of not being able to talk properly and waving his arms about like he can't see. And 4 out of the 5 elements are present and correct. But his skin is blue, not green. No foul, play on. Incidentally, the whole trope of the monster wandering about with outstretched arms came about by accident. The monster was blinded towards the end of one of the Universal films and then revived at the beginning of the next. Unfortunately, only the actor, Bela Lugosi of all people, remembered or cared that the monster was supposed to be blind, so he played him groping about like a sleepwalking Joe Biden for what seemed no apparent reason. And it kind of stuck with the character ever since. So much of our collective consciousness is just based on fuck-ups, really. You could make an observational guessing game out of it. An intellectual property spot the difference. Here's a Shasta soda advert from 1976. How have they evaded copyright?
Igor, go and get me what I crave. Evening, Igor.
If you want a better orange soda, made with more natural orange flavor than ever before, try Shasta. It's got the bright color, the sweet smell, and the great taste of oranges. Shasta, it's the orange soda that can make anybody happy.
Simple really, skin's not green, no neck bolts, no forehead scar either, just the flat top and the square brow really. 2 out of 5, nowhere near enough for legal action, but more than enough to successfully evoke the trope. Or how about our old friend Frank, the Electricity Shares mascot? You know, the one played by Clive Mantle. Certainly don't remember anything about Universal Studios in amongst all those reams of small print about the value of shares going down as well as up. What did they leave out?
Should I? Shouldn't I? If you're undecided about registering for prospectus in the 12 regional electricity company share offers, remember this.
Okay.
It doesn't commit you to anything.
To register, ring 0272 272 272. You could buy into what you plug into.
Simple. They didn't make him green. Covers a lot of issues, that one. Or take this guy for Hamlet cigars.
Happiness is a cigar called Hamlet, the mild cigar.
Actually, he's got his own problems. If you call having a vagina all of a sudden a problem, rather than an unexpected twist that is at least preferable to being dead, which one would assume was the previous case for Fairs. Personally, I'll take alive with a vagina over dead with a penis. I mean, it'll take some getting used to, no question, but then so would not being dead anymore. It's all part of the same process, really. If I were him, I'd probably also be wondering how I'm smoking when I'm presumably not actually breathing. There would be a lot of questions on my mind, frankly, in this situation. Suddenly having a female lower half would only be a piece of the puzzle. At least you can't get lung cancer.
Happiness is a cigar called Hamlet, the mild cigar.
Of course, you might just want to skip the whole thing and use a different trope just for the sake of a quiet life, because you can get hopelessly tangled in litigation if you're not careful. Take a look at this guy.
I heard him yelling in the castle.
Fix me.
His name's Big Frank.
Fix me.
I said, I'm going to fix you. The talking monster, Big Frank.
I'll fix you, Big Frank. Monster Ball is fixed. How do you feel now, Frank?
It's always fun to fix him. The talking monster, Big Frank.
Thank you.
Big Frank talks and his eyes light up. Batteries not included.
Slightly odd idea for a toy, at least in my book. Sort of Operation meets Meccano. And quite why Frankenstein's monster should have a clockwork heart inside him, I don't know. He's not a steampunk cyborg. He's stitched together from corpses, you idiot. Anyway, Big Frank came out in 1993 from Hasbro, and was almost immediately the subject of a lawsuit from Massachusetts toy company M.H. Segan. A few years earlier, Segan had come up with a plush toy they called Frankenstuff, a goofy little squishy doll which would unzip for you to put things in. It looked a lot like Big Frank ended up looking, especially when you consider that when you unzip Frankenstuff's chest cavity, you'd see a clockwork heart, with blue and yellow gears even. Segan pitched this doll to Hasbro in 1985 and were turned down. Although, as you can see, they did eventually get Frankenstuff made, with a few alterations, by Fisher-Price instead. That version came out in 1991. Now, all of a sudden, here was Big Frank, a suspiciously similar toy, only cast in plastic. Hasbro's defence was that the whole case should be dismissed on account of Segan's supposed copyright on Frankenstuff was invalid, because they didn't have a licence for the monster's likeness from Universal. Neither, of course, did Hasbro for Big Frank, but that was neither here nor there. The courts eventually declared the case a draw on grounds of being far too stupid to matter. Neither product remains available. In fact, I'm not sure either of them even survived to the end of the court case in 1996. The world continues to turn. The end.
Batteries not included.
And that's the other advantage of using vampires instead. Not only is Bram Stoker's Dracula in the public domain, but the concept of the vampire and vampirism isn't even copyrightable. Okay, maybe Universal will come down on you if you use the widow's peak and the cape and the Hungarian accent, but not necessarily. It's such a vague claim they have on the image of Dracula that it's generally more trouble than it's worth, unless you're really going all out to specifically rip off the Todd Browning movie. So unless some actual vampires come forward to sue you, you're pretty much safe from litigation. And another advantage is that they're so much more violent. I mean, technically Frankenstein's monster does kill a child, but he doesn't exist to kill in the same way that vampires do. Let alone having their association with a particular bodily fluid. The vampire trope gives you an excuse to do all sorts of dodgy things. Like this, for example.
I want to bite your finger, it's a Dracula game.
Legally speaking, there's nothing preventing a product like this from going on sale even now.
The clock. Just try your luck.
If Dracula's cape opens, you have to put your finger in his mouth and press the lever. If he leaves a mark on your finger, you have to start over again.
He didn't bite me!
If you can sneak all the way around Dracula's house, you'll win the game.
You're not supposed to bite people.
It's a Dracula game.
I want to bite your finger from Hasbro.
Man, Hasbro are messed up. But don't worry, it's just a red marker pen. Not completely psychotic. You've been watching a Bob the Fish production. Thanks! If you haven't found it already, be sure to check out our website at bobthefish.org.uk. Literally hundreds of videos not unlike this one that will make you laugh, think and realise new things or your money back. Which works out great because they're all absolutely free. All of this is possible thanks to the not unique way that Bob the Fish productions are paid for by you, the viewing public, via Patreon. For a donation of as little as £1 a month, not only do you ensure that I still have food and shelter so I can carry on making these programmes, but you could become eligible for a whole host of cool extras. New video essays, special event live streams, all my content a week in advance, and my book on the history of the BBC, Rule the Waves, chapter by chapter as it's written. And some cake, if you go out and buy a cake and eat it while you're watching. And if you don't want to support on a monthly basis, you can make a one-off donation via coffee. It all helps stave off scurvy. bobthefish.org.uk. You make it what it is.